into consideration. So with this, I thank all the witnesses for their opening remarks. And we will now move to the first round of questioning, and which will be of 6 minutes each. I will move to Mr. Hallen. Mr. Hallen, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You can start.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for coming today and sharing your thoughts and experiences. I wanted to touch on some points that some of the speakers had highlighted. We know that this pandemic has brought many things to light. I was always taught that work is work. Work carries a lot of dignity and honor, and we should recognize people's work as such. Now, whether work is defined as skilled or not, we've seen through this pandemic that industries such as some of the ones that were listed were transport, caregiving, manufacturing, processing, and we know they carry so much importance, which have sometimes they haven't given the respect that they deserved previously before the pandemic. We learned that not only is this work important and considered frontline, like some mentioned, but it's also essential and saves lives. These frontline workers are often temporary foreign workers. There doesn't seem to be a proper pathway for them, though, currently. These frontline workers are good enough to be our neighbors and provide essential services, but when it comes to many of the challenges around obtaining a PR, there are so many obstacles for them.
Mr. Hallen, sorry for interrupting. Can you move your microphone a bit away from your mouth? I think there is some buffer. The interpreters are having an issue.
Is this better?
Yes. Thank you.
So I'd like to ask my question to Mr. Sharma, who, by the way, I'd like to mention, it's a great looking poster in the background. Given some of these challenges, in your own experience, what are some of these challenges these frontline workers are going through in obtaining the PR status?
Thank you, sir. In terms of permanent residency, the challenge for permanent residency is that the express entry or the federal immigration system prioritizes the economic class, and the economic class is restricted more or less to the high skill, so-called high skill. And here I just want to point out that, high skill, low skill, I think the reality is it's more like low wage, high wage. I think that's the actual discrepancy here. But the federal system is restricted to so-called high skilled individuals, NOC A, National Occupation Classification NOC 0AB. A lot of these essential workers are in this no man's land of NOC C and D. So you have transport drivers, for example, very, very essential for logistics and our supply chain. And other than some select provincial nominee programs do not have access to a ready pathway for permanent residency. So again, my concern is that we're treating these very, very essential workers, and I completely agree with you in terms of the inherent dignity of work. We're treating these individuals like disposable workers, something similar to some of the Gulf states, which is that you're good enough to come here, you're good enough to work here, contribute to programs that you might not even have access to, such as EI or CPP. And then at the end of your work or whenever we're finished, just go back home. So I think that COVID-19 has exposed a moral obligation and responsibility to whoever's taking care of us, we should also take care of them. So I am proposing expanding the express entry to look at the NOC codes that these frontline essential care essential workers are utilizing and allowing them a pathway to permanent residency.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sharma. Actually, that covered my second question about what kind of pathway do you see theoretically for them to obtain that status? Is there anything you want to add to that at all, like for a pathway?
Sir, in the past, pre-2012, there was a sort of pass-fail Canadian experience class, again, restricted to skilled occupations, but the current system could easily be modified. I don't think that there's, obviously this committee has, we can't tell the provinces what to do, and different provinces will prioritize what they think is important, but I think that it's a ready solution to use the existing express entry pathway, utilize those NOC codes, and take care of those individuals that have been taking care of us.
Thank you for that. So I want to also, Mr. Sharma, talk about, recently we heard the Liberal government announce bringing in about 1.2 million immigrants over the next 3 years. given that we already have so many international students and temporary foreign workers that already are here, instead of this government trying to hit, let's say, unrealistic quotas, doesn't it make more sense for us that we go to the lower hanging fruit, such as international students or temporary foreign workers, which we've seen are so essential, and make the pathway easier for them to obtain a PR status? Like the processing is already halfway there. And like, given that there's so many closures of offices around the world, would this not be a lower hanging fruit to go after?
I would agree. I think it's you have hundreds of thousands of individuals in Canada as temporary foreign workers, irrespective of their knock codes or skill or low skill. And you also have, of course, hundreds of thousands of international students. They are indeed low-hanging fruit. So that would seem to be where we should put our attention to. However, the system that is set up right now makes it very difficult for even a graduate of a 2-year program in Canada, let's say someone who's 22, 23 years old, graduate of a 2-year program in Canada, even with 1 year skilled work experience in Canada with good English, that person will never hit the points required for selection under express entry. For example, the last draw just a couple of days ago was in the 470s. That will take out the vast majority of international graduates with a 2-year
Sorry for interrupting,
diploma.
Mr. Sharma. The time is up. We will have to move to the next person. So we have Mr. Saray. Mr. Saray, you have 6 minutes for your round of questioning.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, 6 minutes goes by quickly. I would like to thank the 4 witnesses for joining us today, for your balanced approach that looks at health and emotion and reunification of families. Thank you very much for your balanced approach. I think that I really liked your testimony. My first question is to all of the witnesses, but I'll start with Mr. Waldman.
About spousal reunification program, and as you know, I'm sure last week we made some changes to the directives, given the decision making officers the consideration on dual intent for spousal sponsorship applications. So do you interpret this as a step in the right direction? What more can we do? Mr. Waldman and then Mr. Sharma.
Yeah, I read the direction, and obviously it's certainly a step in the right direction, because otherwise many visa officers would refuse an application by a spouse outside of Canada, come to Canada saying, no, you're coming as an immigrant, you should do a sponsorship, and you won't get the visitor visa. So by affirming the notion that there is dual intent, it's a step in the right direction. But unfortunately, I think there's still a significant risk that in a lot of cases, people will still be refused, because it still leaves the visa officer with the discretion to say, well, I know there's dual intent, but I'm sure you're going to apply for that permanent residence when you get there, and I'm not going to give you the visa. Now, that might be okay if processing were 6 months or 8 months, but now because of COVID, processing is doubling or tripling. So I think in those circumstances, the minister has to send a much clearer directive to visa officers. We don't want spouses to be separated for years. It's not acceptable. We need to make sure that they get together quickly, and if they can't be processed outside, we'll let them come and be processed inside, unless there are admissibility concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Waldman. Mr. Sherman, do you have anything to add?
I welcome the changes to Regulation 179B. It's interesting. This is kind of like what's old is new again. So many years ago, before IRPA, there was something called a fiancé visa. And so individuals were able to get engaged and then come to Canada. And perhaps there was some abuse there. And so there was a change there. And so I will have to, it's definitely a positive. And I used to be an officer many years ago. It's very difficult. The minister is going to put in their regulations. They can have their sort of manuals. It's very difficult to curb officer discretion. So I think perhaps it's a bit of a wait and see, but it's a very positive step. Now, the only issue is that if it gets refused, what do we do? All we can do is go to the federal court, which is kind of like using a hammer to kill a mosquito. So I do agree with Mr. Waldman. It's a very, very positive step. Hopefully there'll be some manuals that follow that give officers some more guidance so that we can be assured that these applications are properly and substantively considered.
Thank you.